The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain as Maria adjusted her rifle scope for the third time. She had been lying in the same position for over 6 hours, watching the enemy camp through her binoculars. The weight of her sniper rifle pressed against her shoulder, a familiar comfort that had kept her alive through countless missions. Maria wasn't supposed to be here alone. Her spotter, Carlos, should have been beside her, calling out wind speeds and distances, but Carlos was dead, killed 3 days ago when their convoy hit an improvised explosive device on the mountain road. She had watched helplessly as the armored vehicle ahead of hers disappeared in a ball of fire and smoke. The explosion had changed everything. What was meant to be a routine reconnaissance mission had turned into a desperate fight for survival. Maria's unit was scattered across the mountainside, pinned down by enemy forces that seemed to know their every move. Communication with headquarters was spotty at best, and ammunition was running dangerously low. She pressed her eye to the scope again, scanning the valley below. The enemy had set up a sophisticated network of bunkers and machine gun nests, making any advance impossible. Her comrades were trapped in a narrow canyon, unable to move forward or retreat without being cut down by withering gunfire. Maria had always been different from the other soldiers in her unit. While they relied on automatic weapons and heavy firepower, she preferred the precision of a single, well-placed shot. Her rifle was a custom-built weapon, modified to her exact specifications. The stock was worn smooth from years of use, and she knew every scratch and dent on its surface. Growing up in a small mountain village, Maria had learned to shoot from her grandfather, a former hunter who taught her that patience was more valuable than bullets. He would take her into the forest before dawn, showing her how to read the wind, how to control her breathing, and how to wait for the perfect moment. Those lessons had saved her life more times than she could count. The radio crackled to life, breaking her concentration. The voice was barely audible through the static, but she recognized it immediately. It was Lieutenant Rodriguez, her commanding officer, and he sounded desperate. "Ghost 7, this is command. We're taking heavy casualties down here. The enemy has us surrounded on 3 sides. We need immediate support or we're not going to make it out of this canyon." Maria keyed her radio, keeping her voice calm despite the gravity of the situation. "Command, this is Ghost 7. I have eyes on the target area. Give me coordinates for the primary threat." "Ghost 7, we're counting at least 12 machine gun positions. They've got us locked down tight. The main threat is a heavy machine gun nest approximately 3,000 meters northeast of our position. It's been tearing us apart for the past hour." 3,000 meters. Maria felt her heart skip a beat. It was an impossible shot even for someone with her skills. The longest confirmed sniper kill in history was barely over 3 kilometers, and that had been under perfect conditions with a spotter and ideal weather. She was alone, tired and running on nothing but determination and cold rations. She studied the terrain carefully, noting the wind patterns and the heat shimmer rising from the rocks. The target was positioned on a high ridge, partially concealed behind a concrete barrier. She could barely make out the muzzle flash through her scope when the gun fired, sending streams of bullets down into the canyon where her friends were trapped. Maria knew that a conventional approach wouldn't work. The enemy had superior numbers and better positioning, but she also knew that fear could be a weapon more powerful than any bullet. If she could eliminate the right target at the right moment, she might be able to create enough chaos to give her unit a chance to escape. She began to calculate the shot in her mind, factoring in wind speed, bullet drop, and the rotation of the earth itself. At 3,000 meters, even the smallest miscalculation would send her bullet wide of the mark. She had only one chance to get it right. The radio crackled again, this time with more urgency. "Ghost 7, we're running out of time down here. Johnson's been hit and we're almost out of ammunition. If you're going to do something, it has to be now." Maria closed her eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the familiar calm that always came over her before a difficult shot. She thought about her grandfather's words. "The rifle is just a tool. The real weapon is your mind." She opened her eyes and pressed her cheek against the rifle stock, feeling the cool metal against her skin. Through the scope, she could see the machine gun nest clearly now. The gunner was partially visible, his helmet reflecting the afternoon sun. She adjusted her aim slightly, accounting for the distance and the wind that was beginning to pick up from the west. Her finger found the trigger, and she began to apply pressure slowly and steadily. The world around her seemed to fade away until there was nothing but the crosshairs, the target and the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. She had trained for moments like this her entire military career, but nothing could have prepared her for the weight of responsibility she felt now. The lives of her comrades depended on this single shot. If she missed, they would likely all die in that canyon, cut down by enemy fire as they tried to escape. If she succeeded, she might give them the opening they needed to fight their way out. Maria had always believed that every bullet had a purpose, and this one would determine whether her friends lived or died. She steadied her breathing, made one final adjustment to her aim, and prepared to take the most important shot of her life. The wind shifted slightly, and she waited for it to settle. Patience had always been her greatest asset, and she wouldn't rush this shot no matter how desperate the situation became. Through her radio, she could hear the sounds of battle growing more intense, but she forced herself to block out everything except the target in her crosshairs. 3,000 meters. It was a distance that would test every skill she had ever learned, every lesson her grandfather had taught her, and every ounce of determination she possessed. But as she watched the enemy gunner through her scope, Maria knew that impossible shots were just another challenge to overcome. The memory of the explosion 3 days earlier still haunted Maria's dreams. She could feel the heat on her face and hear the screaming metal as the armored vehicle ahead of her was torn apart by the hidden bomb. The blast had been so powerful that it lifted the 30-ton vehicle completely off the ground before slamming it back down in a twisted heap of burning metal. Carlos had been in that vehicle, along with 3 other soldiers from her unit. They had been laughing about something just minutes before the explosion, their voices clear over the radio as they discussed plans for when they returned to base. Carlos had been telling a story about his daughter's first day at school, when the world suddenly erupted in fire and smoke. Maria had been thrown from her own vehicle by the force of the blast, landing hard on the rocky ground 20 meters away. Her ears were ringing and blood was streaming from a cut on her forehead, but she was alive. The same couldn't be said for the men in the lead vehicle. She had crawled through the smoke and debris, desperately searching for survivors. The metal was still too hot to touch, and the acrid smell of burning fuel and plastic filled her nostrils. Through the shattered windows, she could see the twisted forms inside, but there was nothing she could do. Carlos and the others were gone. The ambush had been perfectly planned. The enemy had waited until the convoy was strung out along a narrow mountain road with no place to take cover. After the initial explosion, machine gun fire erupted from the hills on both sides, cutting down anyone who tried to escape from the remaining vehicles. Maria had managed to grab her rifle and equipment before taking cover behind a large boulder. Around her, the surviving members of her unit were scattered and disorganized, trying to find shelter wherever they could. The radio chatter was chaotic, with soldiers calling for medical support and ammunition, while officers tried to establish some kind of defensive perimeter. Lieutenant Rodriguez had taken command after the convoy leader was killed in the blast. He was a good officer, calm under pressure, but Maria could hear the strain in his voice as he tried to coordinate their defense. They were outnumbered and outgunned, trapped in a kill zone with limited ammunition and no immediate hope of rescue. The first night had been the worst. The enemy had used flares to illuminate their positions, making it impossible to move without being seen. Maria had pressed herself against the rocky ground, listening to the bullets whistling overhead and the occasional cry of a wounded soldier. She had counted her remaining ammunition over and over again, knowing that every shot would have to count. On the second day, the enemy had tried a direct assault. They came down from the hills in waves, using the rocky terrain for cover as they advanced on the trapped convoy. Maria had picked off 6 of them with careful shots, each one dropping an enemy soldier at distances of 400 to 600 meters. But for every enemy she killed, 2 more seemed to take his place. It was during that second assault that Maria realized the true scope of their situation. This wasn't just a random ambush by a small group of insurgents. The enemy was well organized, well equipped, and had obviously been planning this attack for weeks or even months. They knew exactly where the convoy would be and when, suggesting they had inside information about military operations. The enemy fighters moved with military precision, using suppressing fire and coordinated advances that spoke of professional training. Their weapons were modern and well-maintained, not the old rifles and improvised explosives typically used by irregular forces. Someone with serious resources was backing this operation. As the hours passed, Maria began to understand that their only hope of survival lay in breaking the enemy's ability to coordinate their attacks. The machine gun nests that had them pinned down were the key to the enemy's tactical advantage. If she could eliminate enough of them, particularly the ones in commanding positions, she might create enough confusion to allow her unit to escape. But the distances involved were beyond anything she had ever attempted in combat. The nearest machine gun position was over 1,000 meters away, well beyond the effective range of most rifles. The farthest positions, including the one that was causing the most damage, were nearly 3 times that distance. Maria had spent the previous night studying the enemy positions through her scope, memorizing their locations and trying to identify patterns in their behavior. She noted which positions were manned during different times of day, how often the crews rotated, and which ones had the best fields of fire into the canyon where her unit was trapped. The heavy machine gun position on the northeastern ridge was clearly the most important target. It commanded a view of the entire canyon and had been responsible for most of the casualties her unit had suffered. The crew manning it was professional and disciplined, firing controlled bursts rather than wasting ammunition on random shooting. Maria estimated the distance at just over 3,000 meters, a shot that would push her rifle and her own abilities to their absolute limits. The bullet would take almost 4 seconds to reach the target, during which time wind, gravity, and even the rotation of the Earth would affect its trajectory. She would have to account for factors that most shooters never even considered. Her rifle was capable of making such a shot, but only under perfect conditions with ideal ammunition and precise calculations. She had hand-loaded her own cartridges for this mission, carefully weighing each powder charge and selecting bullets that she knew would fly true. But even with perfect ammunition, the margin for error at such a distance was measured in inches. The radio brought her back to the present as Rodriguez's voice crackled through the static. The situation in the canyon was deteriorating rapidly, and she could hear the desperation that he was trying to hide. Her friends were counting on her to do something that might very well be impossible. Maria began her final preparations for the shot, checking and rechecking every detail. She confirmed the range with her laser rangefinder, studied the wind patterns through her scope, and calculated the precise elevation adjustment needed for her rifle. Everything had to be perfect because there would be no second chance. Maria's grandfather had taught her that shooting was 10% technique and 90% mental preparation. As she lay behind her rifle calculating the impossible shot ahead of her, his weathered voice echoed in her memory. "Maria, you must become one with the rifle. Feel the wind, understand the bullet's journey, and trust in your training." She closed her eyes and ran through the calculations one more time. At 3,200 meters, her bullet would drop approximately 12 meters from its initial trajectory. The crosswind from the west was gusting at 8 to 10 kilometers per hour, which would push the bullet roughly 2 meters to the left. The temperature was dropping as evening approached, which would affect the air density and slightly increase the bullet's velocity. But beyond the mathematical calculations, there were variables that couldn't be measured with instruments. The heat rising from the sun-baked rocks would create thermal currents that could deflect her bullet unpredictably. The target was partially concealed behind a concrete barrier, giving her only a small window of opportunity when the gunner exposed himself to fire. Maria adjusted her rifle's elevation turret, clicking it up 32 notches to account for the extreme distance. Each click represented a quarter minute of angle, and she had memorized the exact adjustments needed for various ranges during countless hours of practice. Her rifle was an extension of herself, as familiar as her own heartbeat. The weapon itself was a marvel of precision engineering. The barrel was made from cold-hammered steel, free-floated in a rigid aluminum chassis that eliminated any flex or vibration. The trigger was adjusted to break at exactly 1 kilogram of pressure, crisp and clean with no creep or over-travel. Every component had been selected and tuned for maximum accuracy. Through her scope, Maria watched the machine gun position intently. The enemy gunner fired in controlled bursts every 30 to 40 seconds, rising slightly from his concealed position to aim down into the canyon. She timed his pattern carefully, noting that he exposed himself for approximately 3 seconds with each burst of fire. The radio crackled with increasing urgency. "Ghost 7, we've got wounded soldiers who need immediate evacuation. Martinez has been hit bad, and we can't get to him as long as that machine gun has us pinned down. We're running out of options here. Maria keyed her radio, her voice steady despite the pressure she felt. "Command, I need you to coordinate a distraction. When I tell you, have everyone open fire on the secondary positions. I need the main gunner to think he's safe so he'll expose himself for a longer period." "Understood. Go 7. We'll give you whatever you need." She returned her attention to the scope, studying the target area with intense concentration. The gunner's helmet was barely visible behind the concrete barrier, just a small patch of olive green that appeared and disappeared with mechanical regularity. At this distance, that tiny target looked smaller than a coin held at arm's length. Maria began to control her breathing, slowing it down to the rhythm she had practiced thousands of times. Her heart rate decreased and the natural tremor in her hands almost disappeared. She entered the zone that all precision shooters knew, where time seemed to slow down and the world narrowed to nothing but the crosshairs and the target. The wind shifted slightly, and she made a minute adjustment to her aim. At extreme distances, even a small change in wind direction could mean the difference between a hit and a miss. She watched the grass and small bushes near the target, reading the wind patterns like her grandfather had taught her to read the forest. "Ghost 7, are you ready?" Rodriguez's voice was tense with anticipation. "Stand by, Command. I need the wind to settle." Maria watched as a gust stirred the vegetation near the machine gun position, then gradually died down. "Execute distraction in 5 seconds. Mark. 4, 3, 2, 1. Execute." Immediately, gunfire erupted from multiple positions in the canyon as her unit opened fire on the secondary machine gun nests. Tracer rounds streaked across the sky, and the sharp crack of rifle fire echoed off the rock walls. The diversionary attack drew immediate attention from the enemy positions, exactly as Maria had hoped. The main gunner reacted predictably, rising higher behind his weapon to get a better view of the situation. Instead of his usual 3-second exposure, he remained visible for nearly 10 seconds trying to identify the new threat. This was the opportunity Maria had been waiting for. She steadied her crosshairs on the center of the target's visible mass, accounting for all the variables she had calculated. The bullet would take 3.8 seconds to reach the target, during which time the Earth's rotation would move the impact point approximately 15 centimeters to the right. She adjusted her aim accordingly. Maria's finger found the trigger and she began to apply pressure with the same steady, deliberate motion she had practiced countless times. The rifle's trigger was perfectly familiar to her, and she knew exactly when it would break. Everything else faded away until there was nothing but the target, the crosshairs, and the moment of truth. The shot broke with surprising clarity, the rifle recoiling smoothly against her shoulder. She rode the recoil expertly, keeping the scope on target to observe the bullet's impact. For nearly 4 seconds, she watched through the scope as her bullet traveled its impossible trajectory across the mountains. Time seemed suspended as the bullet flew through the air at nearly 3 times the speed of sound. Maria tracked its path with her eyes. Even though the projectile was invisible at that distance, she had done everything correctly, made all the right calculations, and executed the shot perfectly. Now there was nothing to do but wait and see if mathematics and marksmanship could overcome the laws of probability. The target area erupted in a small cloud of dust and concrete fragments as the bullet struck the barrier near the machine gun position. For a moment, Maria couldn't tell if she had hit the gunner or merely the concrete wall behind him. Then the machine gun fell silent, its deadly chatter replaced by an ominous quiet that stretched across the battlefield. Through her scope, she could see the gunner's position, but there was no movement. The helmet that had been visible moments before was gone, and the machine gun barrel pointed uselessly toward the sky. After several long seconds, it became clear that the weapon was no longer manned. The silence that followed Maria's shot was almost deafening. For the first time in 3 days, the heavy machine gun that had dominated the battlefield was quiet. She remained perfectly still behind her rifle, watching through the scope for any sign of movement from the target position. Seconds stretched into a full minute, and still there was no response from the enemy emplacement. The radio exploded with excited chatter as her comrades realized what had happened. "Ghost 7, I don't know how you did it, but that machine gun is down. The whole position looks abandoned." Rodriguez's voice carried a mixture of amazement and relief that was echoed by other voices on the radio frequency. But Maria knew that one shot, no matter how spectacular, wouldn't be enough to save her unit. The enemy still had numerous other positions, and they would quickly realize that their primary weapon had been eliminated by a sniper. She needed to capitalize on the confusion and fear that her impossible shot had created. Through her scope, she could see enemy soldiers in the secondary positions beginning to react to the destruction of the main machine gun nest. Some were pointing toward the northeastern ridge where their comrades had been killed, while others were scanning the surrounding hills trying to locate the sniper who had made such an incredible shot. Maria shifted her aim to the nearest machine gun position, approximately 1,800 meters away. This was still an extremely difficult shot, but well within her capabilities compared to the miracle she had just accomplished. The gunner at this position was clearly agitated, rising from his concealment more frequently as he tried to understand what had happened to his fellow soldiers. She calculated the new firing solution quickly. The range was significantly shorter, which meant less bullet drop and wind drift to account for. The target was also in a more exposed position, giving her a larger area to aim at. Most importantly, the psychological effect of her first shot was already working in her favor, as the enemy soldiers became increasingly nervous and careless. The second shot came much easier than the first. Maria controlled her breathing, settled her crosshairs on the target, and squeezed the trigger with smooth, practiced motion. The bullet struck the gunner center mass and the second machine gun position went silent. Through her scope, she could see other enemy soldiers scrambling for cover as they realized they were being systematically eliminated by an unseen sniper. "Go 7, that's 2 down. Keep it up." The excitement in Rodriguez's voice was matched by similar encouragement from other members of her unit. For the first time since the ambush began, they could sense that the tide of battle was beginning to turn in their favor. Maria methodically worked her way through the remaining machine gun positions, taking careful shots at ranges between 200 and 2,000 meters. Each successful hit increased the panic among the enemy forces, who were now dealing with an invisible threat that could strike them from impossible distances. Several positions were abandoned as their crews fled rather than risk becoming the next target. The enemy's coordinated defense began to crumble as fear spread through their ranks. Soldiers who had been confident and disciplined just minutes earlier were now making mistakes, exposing themselves unnecessarily, and breaking from their positions without orders. The psychological impact of Maria's shooting was proving to be as devastating as the physical casualties she was inflicting. As the machine gun positions fell silent one by one, Rodriguez began organizing a breakout attempt. "All units prepare to move on my command. Go 7 has given us the opening we needed. We're going to fight our way out of this canyon and reach the extraction point." Maria provided overwatch as her comrades began their desperate escape attempt. She picked off enemy soldiers who tried to re-establish defensive positions, her rifle speaking with deadly authority at ranges that should have been impossible for accurate shooting. Every shot was carefully placed, conserving ammunition while maximizing the psychological impact on the remaining enemy forces. The breakout was chaotic but successful. Her unit moved in small groups using the cover of smoke grenades and suppressive fire to mask their movement. Maria shifted position twice during the operation, relocating to different vantage points that allowed her to continue providing sniper support as her friends advanced toward safety. By the time the sun began to set, the surviving members of her unit had successfully escaped the kill zone and reached a defensive position on higher ground. The enemy forces, demoralized by the loss of their key weapons and the devastating effectiveness of the unknown sniper, did not attempt to pursue them. The 3-day siege was finally over. Rodriguez's voice came over the radio one final time as they prepared to move toward the extraction point. "Go 7, I don't know how to thank you. That shot you made, it saved all of our lives. Command is going to want a full debrief when we get back, because I'm not sure they're going to believe what happened here today." Maria felt a mixture of exhaustion and relief as she packed up her rifle and equipment. The impossible shot at 3,200 meters would be talked about for years to come, but she knew that it was more than just marksmanship that had won the day. It was the combination of technical skill, mental preparation, and the determination to never give up on her fellow soldiers that had made the difference. As she prepared to rejoin her unit for the journey to the extraction point, Maria thought about Carlos and the other soldiers who had died in the initial ambush. Their sacrifice had not been in vain, and the surviving members of the unit would live to fight another day because of the skills her grandfather had taught her in the forests of her childhood. The mountain air was cold as night fell, but Maria felt a warmth inside her that had nothing to do with temperature. She had pushed the boundaries of what was possible with a rifle and succeeded in saving the lives of her friends. It was a feeling that no amount of recognition or medals could ever match. The helicopter extraction came just before dawn, its rotors beating a steady rhythm against the cold mountain air. Maria and the surviving members of her unit huddled together in a small clearing, watching the sky anxiously for the first sign of their rescue aircraft. The past 12 hours had been the longest of their lives, moving carefully through enemy territory while avoiding patrols that were still searching for them. Lieutenant Rodriguez had managed to establish radio contact with headquarters during the night, providing a preliminary report of what had happened during the ambush and subsequent escape. The response from command had been a mixture of disbelief and urgent concern. A sniper kill at over 3 kilometers was unprecedented, and the strategic implications of having such capability in the field were enormous. As the rescue helicopter approached their position, Maria could see additional aircraft circling in the distance. Word of the incredible shot had obviously reached the highest levels of military command, and there would be intense interest in understanding exactly how such a feat had been accomplished. She knew that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The flight back to base was conducted in relative silence, with each soldier lost in their own thoughts about the ordeal they had survived. Maria stared out the window at the mountain terrain below, thinking about the split-second decisions and countless hours of training that had led to the moment when everything depended on a single bullet, traveling impossible distance. Upon landing at the main base, Maria was immediately separated from the rest of her unit and escorted to a secure briefing room. The debriefing process began within hours of her return, with intelligence officers, ballistics experts, and senior commanders all eager to understand the technical and tactical details of her record-breaking shot. The questioning was thorough and professional, but Maria could sense the underlying amazement in the voices of her interrogators. They wanted to know everything: the weather conditions, the exact range to target, the type of ammunition used, the rifle modifications, and most importantly, the calculation process that had made such an accurate shot possible at extreme distance. Maria answered each question precisely, providing technical details that were immediately verified by ballistics experts. Her rifle was carefully examined and tested, with every component measured and documented. The ammunition she had used was analyzed down to the molecular level, and her shooting position was visited by a team of surveyors who confirmed the exact range and environmental conditions. The news of the shot spread quickly through military channels, reaching Allied forces and defense contractors around the world. Requests for information came from sniper schools, weapons manufacturers, and research institutions that were studying the limits of precision shooting. Maria found herself at the center of a scientific and military phenomenon that would influence training and equipment development for years to come. But beyond the technical achievement, there was a deeper story that resonated with soldiers everywhere. Maria had demonstrated that individual skill and determination could still make a decisive difference in modern warfare. Her shot had saved the lives of her comrades and turned a hopeless situation into a tactical victory against overwhelming odds. The formal recognition came quickly. Maria was awarded the highest decorations for valor and marksmanship, with ceremonies attended by senior military leaders and government officials. The media attention was intense, with journalists from around the world wanting to interview the soldier who had made the impossible shot. However, Maria remained focused on the memory of her fallen comrades and the responsibility she felt to honor their sacrifice. During interviews, she consistently emphasized that her success had been built on the foundation of teamwork and training that Carlos and the others had helped provide. She refused to accept individual credit for what she viewed as a collective victory. The technical analysis of her shot revealed just how extraordinary the achievement had been. Computer simulations showed that even under perfect conditions, the probability of hitting a human-sized target at 3,200 meters was less than 5%. When factors like wind variation, temperature changes, and target movement were included, the odds dropped to nearly zero. Military historians began comparing Maria's shot to legendary feats of marksmanship from previous wars, but none had been accomplished under such adverse conditions or at such extreme range. The combination of technical skill, mental preparation, and tactical necessity had created a perfect storm that resulted in what many experts considered the greatest sniper shot in military history. The rifle she had used became the subject of intense study, with manufacturers eager to understand the modifications and specifications that had made such accuracy possible. The barrel, trigger system, and scope were all reverse-engineered and incorporated into new weapons designed for extreme long-range shooting. But Maria knew that the real secret wasn't in the equipment. It was in the thousands of hours of practice, the mental discipline she had learned from her grandfather, and the absolute determination to save her friends regardless of the odds. No amount of technology could replace the human element that made the difference between success and failure. Requests for Maria to transfer to specialized units came from military organizations around the world. Special operations commanders wanted her skills for high-value target elimination, while training schools offered lucrative contracts to teach other snipers her techniques. But Maria chose to remain with her original unit, working to rebuild the team that had been devastated in the ambush. The memory of Carlos and the other soldiers who had died continued to drive her forward. She established training programs that emphasized the importance of teamwork and mutual support, ensuring that future soldiers would be better prepared for the kind of situation her unit had faced. Her shot had saved lives, but she was determined that proper training and tactics would prevent similar tragedies from occurring. As months passed, Maria began to understand that her incredible shot had become more than just a military achievement. It had become a symbol of what was possible when training, determination, and courage came together under the most challenging circumstances. The story inspired soldiers throughout the military, proving that individual excellence could still make a decisive difference in modern warfare. 6 months after the impossible shot that saved her unit, Maria found herself standing before a gathering of the world's most elite snipers at the International Precision Shooting Conference. Representatives from dozens of countries had come to hear her speak about the technical and mental aspects of extreme long-range shooting. The audience included legendary marksmen whose names were whispered with reverence in military circles around the globe. The conference was held at a remote training facility that featured ranges extending beyond 4 kilometers, allowing for practical demonstrations of the techniques being discussed. Maria had initially been reluctant to attend, preferring to focus on her duties with her rebuilt unit, but her commanding officers had made it clear that sharing her knowledge was now part of her military responsibilities. As she looked out at the assembled experts, Maria was struck by how much her life had changed since that desperate morning in the mountains. The shy soldier who had learned to shoot in her grandfather's forest had become a global authority on precision marksmanship, consulted by weapons manufacturers, military strategists, and training specialists from around the world. The presentation she gave was technical and detailed, covering everything from ballistic calculations to mental preparation techniques. But the audience was most interested in the psychological aspects of making an impossible shot under extreme pressure. How had she maintained focus when the lives of her comrades depended on a single bullet? What mental techniques had allowed her to execute such a precise shot while under intense stress? Maria explained how her grandfather's hunting lessons had taught her to view shooting as a form of meditation, requiring complete mental clarity and emotional control. She described the breathing techniques she used to steady her heartbeat, the visualization exercises that helped her predict bullet trajectory, and the mental discipline that allowed her to block out distractions during critical moments. During the practical demonstration portion of the conference, Maria was asked to attempt a shot at 3,500 meters, even farther than her record-breaking hit. The range conditions were ideal, with minimal wind and perfect visibility, but the target was still incredibly small at such distance. Hundreds of the world's best shooters watched in silence as she prepared for the attempt. The shot was a miss, but only by a matter of centimeters. The bullet struck just inches from the target center, demonstrating that her original shot hadn't been pure luck, but the result of refined technique and exceptional skill. The assembled experts erupted in applause, recognizing that they had witnessed shooting at the very limits of human capability. After the conference, Maria was approached by defense contractors offering enormous sums for her endorsement of their products and her participation in research and development programs, but she turned down most of these opportunities, choosing instead to focus on projects that would directly benefit soldiers in the field rather than enhance corporate profits. One project that did capture her interest was the development of new training systems that could help ordinary soldiers develop extraordinary marksmanship skills. Working with computer simulation experts and ballistics specialists, Maria helped create virtual reality programs that allowed snipers to practice extreme long-range shooting without the enormous expense of ammunition and range time. The training systems incorporated all the variables that affected long-range shooting: wind patterns, temperature variations, atmospheric pressure, and even the subtle effects of Earth's rotation. Students could practice thousands of shots under different conditions, learning to make the complex calculations that Maria had mastered through years of field experience. But perhaps more importantly, the training programs emphasized the mental and emotional preparation that was crucial for success under pressure. Using biometric monitoring and stress simulation, students learned to control their physiological responses during critical moments, developing the same kind of calm focus that had allowed Maria to make her legendary shot. The success of these training programs led to invitations for Maria to visit military academies and special operations schools around the world. She found herself traveling to remote bases in different countries, working with students who spoke different languages but shared the same dedication to precision and excellence. During one such visit to a mountain warfare school, Maria met a young sniper named Elena, who reminded her strongly of herself at that age. Elena had grown up in a rural area where hunting was a way of life, and she possessed the same natural instincts and patient temperament that were essential for precision shooting. But she lacked confidence in her abilities and doubted whether she could ever achieve the kind of marksmanship that Maria had demonstrated. Maria spent extra time working with Elena, teaching her not just the technical aspects of long-range shooting, but also the mental preparation techniques that were equally important. She shared stories about her grandfather's lessons and the importance of understanding that shooting was as much about the mind as it was about the rifle. Under Maria's guidance, Elena's shooting improved dramatically. More importantly, she developed the confidence and mental discipline that would serve her well in combat situations. Maria recognized that teaching others was becoming as important to her as her own marksmanship achievements. The relationship with Elena also helped Maria process some of the emotional trauma she had carried since the ambush that killed Carlos and the others. By focusing on training the next generation of snipers, she found a way to honor the memory of her fallen comrades while ensuring that their sacrifice continued to serve a meaningful purpose. As her reputation grew, Maria began receiving requests from families of soldiers who had been killed in action. They wanted to meet the woman whose incredible shot had saved so many lives, hoping to find some comfort in knowing that their loved ones' deaths had not been meaningless. These meetings were always difficult, but Maria felt obligated to share her story with anyone who might find peace in hearing it. One particularly poignant encounter was with Carlos's widow and young daughter. They had traveled hundreds of miles to meet Maria, wanting to understand what had happened during those final days and how Carlos had died. Maria spent hours with them, sharing memories of Carlos's humor and dedication, his love for his family, and his courage during the ambush. Carlos's daughter, now 8 years old, asked Maria if her father had been brave when he died. Maria knelt down to the child's level and told her that Carlos had been thinking about her right up until the end, that he had been telling a story about her first day at school when the explosion occurred. She assured the little girl that her father had died protecting his fellow soldiers, and that his sacrifice had ultimately helped save the lives of many other families. The conversation was emotionally devastating, but it also provided closure that Maria hadn't realized she needed. She understood that her shot had been about more than just military tactics or personal achievement. It had been about preserving families, protecting futures, and ensuring that the bonds between soldiers meant something tangible and lasting. This understanding changed how Maria approached her role as a trainer and mentor. She began incorporating lessons about the human cost of warfare into her technical instruction, helping students understand that precision shooting was ultimately about protecting lives rather than simply eliminating targets. Every shot fired in combat had consequences that extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation. The training program she developed began to emphasize decision-making under pressure, helping snipers understand when to take difficult shots and when to seek alternative solutions. Maria had learned that the ability to make an impossible shot was valuable, but the wisdom to know when such shots were necessary was even more important. Her influence extended beyond military circles as well. Maria was invited to speak at universities about the physics and mathematics of ballistics, helping to inspire a new generation of scientists and engineers. She worked with researchers developing new materials and technologies that could improve the accuracy and effectiveness of precision weapons. But despite all the recognition and opportunities that came her way, Maria never forgot the lesson her grandfather had taught her in the forest, that shooting was ultimately about patience, discipline, and respect for the power of the rifle. These values guided every decision she made, whether she was training students, developing new techniques, or simply reflecting on the shot that had changed her life forever. The memory of that impossible morning in the mountains remained vivid in her mind, not as a moment of personal triumph, but as a reminder of what could be accomplished when training, determination, and necessity converged under the most challenging circumstances. It was a story she would carry with her always, along with the responsibility to ensure that the lessons learned from that day would benefit future generations of soldiers who might face similar impossible situations. 5 years had passed since the shot that changed everything, and Maria stood once again in the mountains where it all began. She was no longer the same soldier who had lain behind her rifle that desperate morning, calculating an impossible shot to save her trapped comrades. Time and experience had transformed her into something she never expected to become. A legend whose story was told in military academies around the key world at the mountain clearing where her unit had been ambushed was now marked with a small memorial honoring Carlos and the other soldiers who had died in the explosion. Maria visited this place every year on the anniversary of the attack, bringing fresh flowers and spending quiet moments remembering the friends she had lost. The memorial was simple but meaningful, consisting of a granite stone inscribed with their names and the words, "Their sacrifice gave others life." As she knelt beside the memorial, Maria reflected on how profoundly that single shot had affected not just her own life, but the entire field of precision marksmanship. The techniques she had developed and the training programs she had created were now standard curriculum at sniper schools worldwide. Hundreds of soldiers had benefited from the knowledge gained through her experience, and many lives had been saved as a result. The rifle she had used to make the impossible shot was now displayed in the military museum at headquarters, mounted in a place of honor alongside other weapons that had played decisive roles in military history. But Maria knew that the real legacy wasn't the rifle or even the shot itself. It was the understanding that individual excellence could still make a meaningful difference in modern warfare when combined with proper training, mental preparation, and unwavering determination. Lieutenant Rodriguez, now a colonel, had remained in touch with Maria throughout the years. He often spoke about how her shot had not only saved their lives that day, but had fundamentally changed his understanding of what was possible when soldiers were pushed to their absolute limits. The experience had made him a better leader, more appreciative of the unique skills and capabilities that each soldier brought to their unit. Elena, the young sniper Maria had mentored, had gone on to achieve remarkable success in her own military career. She had made several exceptional shots under combat conditions, including one at nearly 2,800 meters that saved a reconnaissance team from certain destruction. Elena always credited Maria's training for her success, but Maria knew that the young woman possessed the same natural instincts and dedication that no amount of instruction could provide. The training facility that Maria now directed had become the premier destination for advanced marksmanship instruction. Students came from allied military forces around the world to learn the techniques and mental disciplines that had made her legendary shot possible. But the facility taught more than just technical skills. It emphasized the ethical responsibilities that came with the power to eliminate targets at extreme distances. Maria had insisted that every course include extensive training on rules of engagement, target identification, and the psychological impact of precision shooting. She wanted her students to understand that being capable of making impossible shots carried with it the responsibility to use that capability wisely and with full awareness of the consequences. The research and development work continued as well. Maria collaborated with scientists and engineers on projects ranging from advanced ballistics computers to new training methodologies that could accelerate skill development. But she always insisted that technology should enhance, rather than replace, the fundamental human skills that made precision shooting possible. One of her most significant contributions was the development of stress inoculation, training that helped snipers maintain accuracy under extreme psychological pressure. Using biometric monitoring and realistic scenario simulations, Students learned to control their physiological responses during life or death situations. The training was based directly on Maria's own experience of making a critical shot, while her friends' lives hung in the balance. The international recognition continued to grow. Maria had been awarded honors from more than a dozen countries, and her name appeared in military textbooks alongside other legendary figures in warfare history. But she remained grounded by the memory of that morning in the mountains and the knowledge that her success had come at the cost of friends' lives. Carlos's daughter, now 13 years old, had maintained contact with Maria through the years. She had developed an interest in mathematics and science, inspired partly by Maria's explanations of the complex calculations involved in long-range shooting. Maria had become something of a mentor to the girl, helping her understand that precision and discipline could be applied to any field of study, not just military applications. During their most recent meeting, the girl had asked Maria if she ever regretted making the shot that made her famous. It was a profound question that Maria had never been asked so directly. After thinking carefully, she had explained that she regretted the circumstances that made the shot necessary, but not the shot itself. If faced with the same situation again, she would make the same choice without hesitation. As the sun began to set over the mountain memorial, Maria prepared to leave for another year. She had accomplished more than she ever imagined possible when she first learned to shoot in her grandfather's forest. The impossible shot had opened doors she never knew existed and given her opportunities to influence military training and save lives around the world. But as she walked away from the memorial, Maria carried with her the same quiet humility that had always defined her character. She understood that her legendary shot was not just about individual achievement, but about the countless people who had contributed to her success. Her grandfather who taught her to shoot, Carlos who had been her spotter and friend, the instructors who had refined her skills, and the comrades whose lives had depended on her accuracy. The story of the 3,200-meter shot would continue to be told for generations, inspiring future soldiers to push beyond what they believed possible. But for Maria, it would always be remembered not as a moment of personal triumph, but as a reminder of the bonds between soldiers and the lengths they would go to protect each other. In the end, that was the most important lesson of all.